that in the United States and in most of the world we have an economic system called capitalism. In capitalism, the centers of economic power, the factories, the land, the stock market, the natural resources, the industries, all of these things which for the most part, all of these centers of economic power are for the most part the property of capitalists or owners. And that these factories produce things, these houses get built, these apartments are rented, these stores are shelved, so that the capitalists who own them can make money. And that these capitalists, they compete with each other in order to make profits. And they contend with each other and they fight over different markets. And as they compete with each other, they're constantly trying to make production more and more efficient. And as they compete and new inventions come into existence, the goal is not to make life for everyone else better. It's not to make a better society, but it's to make more profits for these owners. And part of the way that they make production more efficient and they make profits is by eliminating labor. The cheaper you can make something, the fewer people you can hire, the less skilled the person you hire can be, the less you can pay them, and the more profits you can make. And this process eventually leads to a problem. As it continues, more and more workers lose their jobs, and the wages of those who are hired goes down. As the capitalists drive harder and harder to make more profits, the ability of people to buy the products that they make decreases. And pretty soon the market is full of products that can't be sold, and that's a glut. It's what the economist John Maynard Keynes called underconsumption, or Karl Marx called overproduction. And it results in mass layoffs, unemployment, low wages, low prices. And furthermore, my understanding is that when there's a particularly huge advance in the field of technology, that it takes society a long time to adjust, and that there's a long period of a depression or an economic crisis resulting from this advance in the field of technology. So that's the thesis based on economics. So now I'll go to analysis. Now analysis, the analysis is based on something that I have studied, which is political science and politics. And my understanding is that when capitalist economies enter a period of crisis or a depression, there are two distinct political tendencies that emerge as a result. The first tendency that emerges is among those who are impoverished. Those who don't have jobs, who have seen their incomes slightly or significantly decrease, the people who are losing their homes and their ability to survive, you can call them the newly dispossessed, they begin to gather together. And they begin to take care of each other and function collectively out of economic necessity. People can't survive on their own because of the economic crisis, so they begin to depend on each other. I think some people call it mutual aid. And eventually these combinations or groupings of people who have been cast out of the economy, they move from simply being mutual aid and cooperation to actually making demands on the power structure. They begin to confront society at large, especially the rich. They begin to demand that there be some relief of their suffering. They demand things like jobs and housing and education and health care. And we can call this first political tendency that arises in a period of economic crisis, we can call it the communalism. I don't really want to call it socialism or communism because it can express itself many different ways ideologically. A lot of times the trade unions will play this role and they'll have like a left political orientation, but in some societies you can see religious organizations or nationalist organizations playing this role. This ideology, this movement that you can say, it emerges, and it's a way of people demanding economic reform and fomenting social unrest. So while this first political tendency emerges, you get a second political tendency. As the economic situation gets worse and the profits of the business owners go down and the resistance of the people increases, the circles of power see a need for society to be less democratic. They see a need for society to function in a more tightly organized way. More power is given to the military and policing organizations, while at the same time power is taken away from democratic and elected bodies. Civil liberties like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and the right to privacy are eroded. Feelings of national chauvinism, racism, and hate are promoted. Titanic efforts to redirect the anger of the people away from the rich and powerful and at some scapegoat, whether it be a foreign country or a minority within the country, are taken up. Vigilante terrorist organizations that are not directly accountable to the government emerge and begin to terrorize and attack innocent people. And at the same time, the police and the military themselves become more vicious and repressive. The division between the state apparatus, like the police and the military, and society at large gets bigger. The cops and the military begin to look at people as a frightening mob of others that they have to control. And at the same time, there's a big push for war around the world. Economic competitors on the global market become military targets in the hope that an armed confrontation can somehow restart the economy. And I think the second tendency that emerges in a period of economic crisis, you can call it fascism. It calls itself many different things, but I think we can all agree that it's fascism. These ideas that I'm expressing are not basically new. They've been said by economists and political analysts over the last 100 years. But what I contend is that the computer revolution has advanced technology to such efficient levels that the entire world economy is kind of shaking as a result. One example is, years ago they had these book binderies where hundreds of people, thousands of people sometimes would work all day binding books. Now they have a machine that just pushes out a book. They push a button and a book comes out, right? The world economy simply doesn't have room for millions and millions of people. In the 1970s and 80s, leftist economists talked about automation, and they had no idea really what was coming with the computer revolution. People in Latin America are fleeing to this country. People in Africa and the Middle East are fleeing to Europe. People in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and the Philippines are spreading out all across the world. Within the United States, young workers are fleeing from the South and the Midwest to the coasts. The world economy is reeling from an economic crisis brought on by the computer revolution and a glut of overproduction. We are now seeing the beginning of the resistance, the uprisings of the dispossessed in response to this economic crisis. Events like the Occupy Wall Street protests, the rise of social democratic forces like Syriza in Greece, Podemos in Spain, or the presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders represent the demands of people who have been economically dispossessed and are upset with the current financial situation. And the fascism is also arising. Obama has declared his right to execute people, essentially murder U.S. citizens without any due process with the drone strike program. Donald Trump is emerging, rallying people with kind of a cynical stand-up comedy routine while promising to repress immigrants and attack the rights of Muslim Americans. Police are murdering people on videotape, as we just heard about, and basically being given a free pass by the courts. The government is torturing people, and we all know what's going on, and it's been pretty much normalized, the right of the government to torture people. As the 2016 elections are getting closer, it is apparent that the economic crisis has turned into a political crisis. The resistance of the people, the communalism, the fascism, they're battling each other. And meanwhile, there's a drive to reboot the economy in terms of war. Now, the war in Iraq, it didn't fix the economy. Millions of Iraqis are dead, and that country was thrown into chaos and poverty, and from that chaos and poverty has emerged ISIS. They had an attack on Libya, the most prosperous country on the African continent. It was bombed and destroyed, and now ISIS is recruiting there, and there's an extreme level of poverty. It hasn't fixed the economy. Things have only gotten worse. Syria has been destroyed. The United States and Saudi Arabia have been pouring loads of money and weapons into forces trying to overthrow the Syrian government. ISIS originated as a faction among these forces. Syria is in chaos. 250,000 people are dead, and the economy has not been fixed. So now the rich and powerful are gradually moving closer to talking about taking an even bigger gamble. A war with Russia, a war with China, a war with the Islamic Republic of Iran would be far more disastrous than anything we saw in a war with Iraq, Libya, or Syria. This wouldn't be a regime change operation. This would be a huge global confrontation. We're talking about World War III. Now, it's not going to happen tomorrow, obviously, but world events are moving very rapidly. Wars have erupted in many countries, and if you'll look, in many countries you have Russia, Iran, and China on one side, and the US and NATO on the other.